Welcome to Shredder Fanfic. Like, subscribe, and hype video. Join members to gain early access to new videos. After the main character dies in his previous life, he gets reborn as the ARK Reaper King inside of Monster Hunter. How will Monster Hunter react to the ARK Reaper King?
Monster Hunter, what if I am ARK Reaper King? Chapter 16, and they fell like rain. The nest was silent when I rose. Not still, never still. The spawns breathed. The walls pulsed. The silk vibrated with the faint feedback of their dreams, soft waves radiating through the resin-carved supports like echoes of some deeper motion. But no movement. No hissing. No footfalls. Good. They were learning restraint. The ambush chamber above was ready. The descent lines had held through 20 drills. The bone trigger anchors shaped from Jagra's ribs and sealed in hardened resin were tensioned to release with minimal resistance. The drop zone was tight, 4 meters wide, 7 long, just enough to catch a single body in transit before it could look up. The fall zone was only 2 meters below the vent ceiling. Enough to build momentum. Not enough to break legs. It had to be tested. Not on prey. Not on meat. On a human. A scout. The guild's patrol cycle rotated every 3 days. The outer zones of Wildspire saw scouts first unarmed, quick-footed, usually with a palico handler, sometimes alone. Their job wasn't combat. It was patterning. They followed trace trails left by larger teams. Their maps updated the field charts. Their deaths updated nothing. I needed one. I climbed above ground an hour before dawn. The air was cool, dry, stretched thin by the loss of nighttime heat. The sky had not yet bled into color. The ridge between sectors 2 and 3 curled in a long crescent, and I perched along its highest arc. Still. I didn't need to see them to know where they were. The scout flies came first, green, loose, trailing behind their master like a signal fire. The glow was faint, but it bounced off the canyon floor with each turn. I saw it at the same time I felt the footsteps. 2 of them. 1 human. 1 palico. They weren't talking. That made it easier. I turned from the ridge and descended into the gulch below the boulder ring. Not toward them. Ahead of them. They were walking east. I would lead them west. I crossed their path at a run 200 meters ahead. Not fast. Deliberate. Heavy enough to leave the trail of something large. Not slow enough to be obvious. Just enough to be heard. Then I scraped my claws across a flat stone, deep and clean. 3 strokes. 1 shallow. 2 deep. No pattern any creature in their charts would match. They'd want to investigate. They always did. They arrived 3 minutes later. I watched from the upper wall, pressed low behind a sandstone arch, acid lining my tail. The scout was young 20s, lean built, tracking lantern strapped to his back, scout dagger across one shoulder. No bowgun. No glaive. No threat. The palico rode his back, one paw gripping a signal sensor, the other adjusting the readout. They stopped at the claw marks. The scout crouched, touched the deepest of the 3. Said something to the cat. Too low to hear. He stood. Turned. Followed the trail. Not fast. But consistent. I led him away from the path. Left new marks every 20 steps. Each one smaller. Lighter. Like a wounded predator dragging a broken limb. He bit the story. Swallowed it whole. I led him to the drop vent by mid-morning. The canyon narrowed into a tight cleft surrounded by thorn-rooted trees. The top of the ambush chamber sat just beneath a crag of sun-bleached rock, wrapped in spiderweb thistle and dead cactus vines. The scent trail led straight through the underbrush and down the slope into the tunnel mouth. The scout paused. Good. Hesitation meant focus. He stepped forward. The palico followed. No words. No warning. I was already gone, curled above in the silk lattice, pressed against the ceiling, watching through the resin-cracked vent. The spawn crouched beside me. Firstborn right. Secondborn left. Both coiled tight. Both watching. Both still. I gave no signal. Just waited. The scout stepped through the trigger line. Thin. Invisible. Drawn across the floor like dust. He didn't notice. He passed beneath the central bone anchor. The resin creaked. The cord split. The ceiling fell. And with it we fell too. I hit first. Not on him. Beside him. My weight cracked the floor and sprayed dust into his eyes. He shouted. The palico screamed. Then the firstborn landed. Straight on his back. Claws first. One into the shoulder. One into the spine. No killing blow. Just wait. The secondborn struck the palico before it could move, flattened it with a hiss, tail curling around the tiny weapon it carried. Clawed it across the throat. One swipe. Still breathing. But not fighting. The scout struggled. Kicked. Tried to reach his signal flare. The firstborn bit his hand. Hard. Blood sprayed across the stone wall. He shrieked. I hissed once short, high-pitched. The firstborn backed off. The secondborn turned toward me, eyes wide, mouth open. Still learning. Still too fast. I walked forward and pressed a claw to the scout's throat. His eyes locked onto mine. Wide. Terrified. Searching. I didn't speak. I never would. I opened my tail vent and let the barb slide forward. He screamed. Too late. The egg implanted. The larva would root fast. Maybe 6 hours. I stood. The scout tried to crawl away. His legs failed him. He whimpered. Bled. But he didn't die. That wasn't the point. I wanted them to find him. I hissed twice. The spawns backed away. We climbed back into the ceiling and vanished. Above. Gone. Silent. I watched from a half-kilometer away as the flare finally went up. Late. Faint. Too much blood loss. It would take the patrol team 20 minutes to reach him. He would be alive for maybe 15. When they found him, he would be shivering. Muttering. He wouldn't remember what happened. But he'd have a name for it. He would call it a trap. But they wouldn't find one. No bone triggers. No silk cord. The spawns had already pulled them up. No scent left. No blood trail. Only silence. And fear. Back in the nest, I coiled into the ridge above chamber 1 and watched the spawns sleep. Firstborn rested on the left. Tail curled. Head down. Secondborn pressed against the rib wall. Still twitching. But steadier now. The bond was growing. Soon they wouldn't need me. Not for every strike. Only for the signal. The hive would learn. And soon. It would hunt. Chapter 17, What They Become Without Me. The air inside the tunnels had thickened. Not with heat. With pressure. The kind that clings to silence. That hangs inside the ribbed hollows of a nest when something beneath the surface begins to change. It was the second spawn. Its breathing had steadied, but its pace had not. It woke first now. Prowled the outer chamber while the firstborn still slept. Aggression? No. Impatience. It had tasted a kill, even if not its own. It had dropped from above, seen a human bleed beneath its claws. The second-born wanted more. And I would give it what it asked for. Not a command. A chance. I returned to Chamber 1 alone, crawled along the high ceiling beams woven from hardened silk and coated in dried resin. The early morning vibrations had not shifted, no new monsters above, no wind tunneling, no water movement. The nest was secure. I dropped into the hatch chamber and watched them sleep. The firstborn lay in a curled ring of bone, tail around its limbs, 4 eyes shut beneath the translucent second lid. Calm. Efficient. Even its resting posture had become quiet. Trained. The second-born stood pressed against the central wall upright. Eyes open. Breathing shallow. Waiting. It saw me first. Didn't move. Didn't hiss. Just watched. When I stepped into the chamber, it flexed its tail twice. Ready. I hissed once. A short, rising tone. The firstborn woke instantly. I led them not above ground, not to hunt prey, not into wind or sunlight. Into the tunnels. A closed space. Where vision failed. Where sound mattered more than size. Where instinct ruled over strength. This was where reapers were born. And this was where spawns would learn to lead. Without me. I chose Corridor 9. The spiral trench, as I marked it. It wound behind the east wall, snaking through a cavern of loose fossil stone that had once served as a storage tunnel for unused corpses. No exit. No vertical escape. One entrance. One end. The perfect cage. I had captured a wild Jagras 2 days prior. Not an alpha. Mid-size. Injured. Torn hind leg. Scarred eye. It was dying, but slow. I bound it in silk and let it starve just long enough to make it desperate. Then I sealed it inside the trench and released the spawns. I did not follow. They entered together, heads low, tails tight, dorsal sacs dimmed. The firstborn took the left wall. The secondborn the center path. Neither hesitated. I stayed behind the resin curtain I had woven across the tunnel mouth. Observing only through vibration and scent. I felt them move like heartbeats. 2 pulses independent, yet rhythmic. The Jagras stirred near the far end. I had removed the silk from its legs just before sealing the corridor. It could run. Fight. But not for long. The spawns reached the curve of the trench where the tunnel narrowed into a tight elbow. I marked their breathing pattern. Firstborn, still slow. Secondborn, accelerating. The Jagras smelled them. It started to panic. I felt it in the floor. Footsteps. Dragging tail. Shallow, rapid breath. It didn't charge. It fled. Wrong move. The secondborn lunged first. I felt the force of its body slam into the stone, too loud. Too early. Missed. It skidded. Claws scratched the wall. I heard a hiss, not the secondborn. The Jagras. It tried to bite back. I didn't interfere. The firstborn moved then. Quietly. Fast. It didn't strike from behind. It cut the escape. I felt it take position across the elbow curve, stepped into the narrow space and coiled low. The Jagras didn't see it. The secondborn attacked again, this time from the side. The Jagras dodged, trying to pivot. And the firstborn rose and bit through its throat. No scream. No thrashing. Only silence. Efficient. Clean. They fed together. But I watched who fed first. The secondborn. Not because it won. Because the firstborn let it. That was not submission. It was calculation. The firstborn was learning to lead not through dominance. Through outcome. Let the younger feed. Then finish the work. It would ensure loyalty. And when the secondborn matured, it would follow. After 20 minutes, they left the corpse and returned to me. I stood in the resin curtain threshold, silent. They didn't hiss. They didn't seek command. They sat. Side by side. Breath steady. Eyes forward. Waiting. Not for food. Not for permission. For purpose. They were ready. I turned back into the tunnels and led them toward Chamber 3. The burial pit. The egg vault. It wasn't full yet. But it would be. And now I had hunters. Not infants. Not parasites. Pack. Chapter 18, The Scent of Misunderstanding. The guild was closed now. They wouldn't say it aloud. Not in their journals, not around campfires, not even to each other. But I felt it in the way they moved. The way their scout flies hovered too long near cracked stone. The way they stopped speaking when passing near dead tree hollows. The way they left less space between steps. They thought they were hunting a predator. They hadn't understood they were already inside the hive. I moved through the southern tunnel systems in silence. No spawn followed me. I hadn't brought them this time. They had earned rest after their solo hunt. The Jagra's kill still lay where they left it, partially eaten, throat opened in a clean crescent. The secondborn had bit too shallow on the first strike, but adjusted after correction. The firstborn had not needed correction. They would be useful soon. But for this, I worked alone. The next stage wasn't about feeding. It was about confusion. The upper southern tunnel branched into 3 forks, one sealed, one active, and one collapsed. The collapsed fork hadn't been made by me. The stone here had failed years before salt pressure from beneath, heat fractures from wild spires shifting plates. A full ceiling cave-in, bones caught in the rubble. Old bones. Herbivore. Large. Long dead. But bones were still evidence. To the guild, they meant something. They told stories. I would give them a new one. I descended into the cave-in slowly. Tail low, dorsal sacs darkened. The air was thicker here, stale. No monsters came this deep. The passage had been sealed long enough for moisture to settle across the edges of the fallen stone, creating rivulets of white mineral crust. I began with scent. I crushed a dried piece of Rathian membrane long since flaked, coated in dust and mixed it with diluted resin. The smell would mimic fear venom discharge, what a wyvern might excrete if fatally wounded. I pressed it into the walls. Then I took Kestodon blood old, sour, thickened by coagulation and streaked it in lines across the cave's outer shell. Each mark was placed to suggest movement downward. Not flailing. Retreating. The shape of a creature dragging itself into the dark. Then I smeared small amounts of Jagra's acid over the entrance, mimicking the acidic secretion of a predator that had just fed. Again, old. Not recent. Just enough to confuse. To suggest. Never to show. I filled the gaps between collapsed stone with silk. Only one line per crevice. Thin enough to snap under light pressure. I coated the silk with old dust and packed sand. Visibly nothing. But if someone stepped here, even lightly, the silk would break and vibrate. And I would know. I placed 6 lines in total. Then I turned to the center of the chamber. And buried the knife. It was a guild knife. Not new. Taken from the scout days ago. The one we'd implanted. He hadn't noticed it missing when they found him. I had pulled it from his belt as he bled. It was etched with initials. KT. They would know the name. I sank it into the corpse of an old Raphanos I had dragged from Chamber 2. No wings, just hide, cracked bones, hollow body. I slit its throat clean and placed the knife just between the clavicles. Blood soaked the blade. Mixed blood. Not Raphanos. Jagras. Scout. Diluted. Impossible to type. Perfect to speculate. Then I scattered more silk over the floor, just enough to tangle lightly across boots. Not enough to resist. Just enough to be noticed. Like spider web in the wind. When I finished, I climbed the rear wall and embedded myself above the entrance in a pocket of cool shale. The guild would arrive within the hour. I did not breathe. I did not glow. I only watched. They came in a group of 4. 2 handlers, 1 hunter, 1 palico scout. No armor. Light packs. Only 1 long blade, no ranged gear. Standard field team. They walked in staggered formation, hunter in front, palico in back, the others tight behind. 1 carried a scroll case. 1 had a mapping kit. They stopped when they saw the first scent marker. Rathian. Faint. Almost gone. But still real. The scroll handler leaned in. Whispered something. The hunter stepped forward, touched the wall. They entered. 1 line broke beneath the palico's foot. Vibration reached me immediately. 1 pulse. I shifted forward 1 claw's length. No sound. No movement. I waited. They saw the knife second. They stopped talking. No whispers. No questions. I watched the scroll handler's hands. They didn't reach for a pen. They reached for a flare. But he didn't fire it. He just held it. The hunter knelt at the Raphanos corpse. Tilted the knife. Said something short. Flipped. Measure. The others clustered around him. Still no flare. Still no noise. The palico crept to the edge of the chamber and sniffed the silk. It touched 1 thread with a paw. The line snapped. The cat didn't flinch. It growled. The hunter turned sharply. Looked at the thread. Took a step back. Then said something I understood without hearing. Don't touch anything else. They left without documenting the scene. No trace packets. No sketches. No logs. They backed out slowly, the flare never fired. They didn't try to cover their tracks. They didn't need to. This wasn't evidence. This was warning. And it had worked. I stayed still for 3 hours after they left. No one returned. No scout flies. No signal pulses. No footsteps. When I returned to the nest, the spawns were awake. Restless. They could smell that something had changed in me. My outer scent sac pulsed in narrow intervals, low agitation. Not fear. But anticipation. The second-born hissed once, short, confused. The firstborn did not hiss. It stepped toward me. Lowered its head. And waited. I touched its shoulder once. Not command. Just transfer. The information flowed. Now it knew what we had done. And now it would begin teaching the second. By morning, the guild would rewrite their maps. They would mark the cave-in as structurally unstable. They would advise no further exploration without heavy equipment. They would classify the entire quadrant as high-risk, unverified threat. That was fine. They would seal it. And forget it. And I would remain beneath it. Building. Waiting. Chapter 19, Ghost Bones Beneath Earth. The guild now feared the dark. Not instinctively. Not the way prey feared predator. This was different. Analytical fear. They had begun to write around it, like fungus curling from the shadow of a stone. I read it in their movement. Fewer scouts sent underground. More signal flares launched from surface stations. Each expedition now logged with a risk tier. Quadrant 12 had been marked red. The tunnel I misled them into had been reclassified, not an apex zone. Not an elder lair. Unknown. They didn't want an answer. They wanted it closed. But the guild could not seal what it didn't understand. And when fear fails to contain, it breeds stories. That was what I needed. So I gave them another. It began with fur. Palico fur, torn from the body, stripped of flesh. I had found it on the edge of Sector 5, where a Jagras pack had devoured a support scout team days prior. The feline's corpse had been carried off crushed, cracked, forgotten. But its fur was intact. I scraped it from the bones, washed it in resin fluid to erase blood scent, and let it dry. Then I shaped it. Small enough to carry. Recognizable enough to trigger alarm. Then I went further. I returned to the hatch vault and pulled the shattered helmet of the scout we had ambushed in the vent chamber. It still held bite marks. The spawns had learned too fast puncture points too clean. But it would do. I scratched the surface, left cracks inconsistent with monster teeth. Not a maul. A fall. I ripped 3 of the inner lining straps and dipped them in Rathian venom non-lethal doses, but enough to simulate toxin trace. I rubbed Barath dust into the outer shell, to make the helmet seem displaced. Like it had been dragged. Handled. Fought over. Then I broke the ribcage of a juvenile Kuluyaku. Reshaped the bones. Filed them to look feline. The Palico remains were ready. Now I needed a place to bury them. Not in the known paths. Not near the nest. A place between quadrants. A site the guild hadn't touched in months. The Dry Spire Ruin. Northwest Sector 8. Half swallowed by sandstorms. Stabilized only briefly after last year's excavation. The guild had abandoned it too costly to maintain, no monster signatures strong enough to prioritize. That meant the patrols were thin. That meant I could cure it. I moved by night. Dorsal sacs cold. Tail dragging a spiral behind me to break airflow. The spawns remained behind, asleep, full from the kill they hunted alone that morning to Aptonath in the gulch above the sinkhole. No intervention. No guidance. They tracked by scent and sound. They were growing. And now I needed them to stay unseen. So I went alone. The ruin loomed out of the dark like a drowned skeleton. Massive ribs of sandstone, the last bones of a tower long broken by wind and rot. Cracked archways. Carved glyphs. No human steps for weeks. Perfect. I buried the remains in layers. First, the bones. Then the helmet. Then the fur. I pressed each layer into the stone like a page in a book. At the center of the chamber, I carved a crude pattern into the wall. Not a symbol, nothing real. Just lines. Vertical, curving, crossed. A visual anomaly. A shape they'd think had meaning. And I smeared it with diluted reaper venom, mixed with soil and bird blood. Let the streak dry dark. Then I backed out of the ruin. One trail only. Kuluyaku. Fake tracks. Broken stride. Deep toe indent. A coward's retreat. But one that ended in death. Let them read it. Let them invent the predator. I waited 30 hours. No patrols came. But the scout flies did. 3 of them, glowing dim over the outer wall of the ruin. That meant someone had launched a remote search. I traced the glow. Then shadowed the team. They arrived in the morning. 2 researchers. No weapons. Only scrolls and mapping plates. I had picked the right bait. They didn't enter with caution. They entered with curiosity. They found the fur first. Spoke quietly. They picked it up. Bagged it. Then the helmet. The younger one froze. Spoke a name. Too low for me to hear, but I saw the tension in the older one's hands. Katie. They knew the name etched on the plate. They knew he'd survived. But his helmet didn't belong here. And neither did Palico remains. Then they saw the wall. The marks I carved. The smears. The blood that wasn't blood. The shape that didn't mean anything but looked like it did. They didn't take samples. They didn't record glyph rubbings. They turned and left. Faster than they arrived. No look back. No discussion. I followed them to the ridge. They signaled a warning flare mid-hike. Red-white. High alert. They believed they had found something cultic. Not monstrous. Human. And worse, deliberate. That was the genius of it. They wouldn't blame a beast. Beasts didn't carve. Beasts didn't arrange helmets and fur and bones in shapes meant to unsettle. This wasn't a den. It was a message. And because they didn't understand the words, they would write their own. They would guess. And their guesses would scare them worse than truth. I returned to the hive just before nightfall. The spawns had begun training without me. I found the firstborn standing over the second, one claw pressing lightly into the rib between the third and fourth segment. A show of restraint. Not dominance. Instruction. I hissed once. They both turned. The firstborn stepped back. The secondborn didn't lower its head. But it didn't strike. They were evolving. Not biologically. Tactically. I stepped into the center of the nest and dragged a line of scent resin across the chamber floor. A white arc. A territory claim. The firstborn stepped forward. Sniffed. Then repeated the arc on the opposite wall. The hive was learning to speak. And soon, it would write back. Chapter 20, they'll say we worship bones. No one guards the old ruins. That truth sits like a worm in the heart of the guild's illusions. They watch the monsters, they patrol the nests, they classify teeth and talons and burrows, but they do not watch the stone. They think the ruins are dead. Barren. No threat lives in dead language. No predator nests in broken temples. Nothing crawls from the walls of a buried civilization, not after the rot has dried. They believe time erases intention. I believe it hides it. And now they will learn the difference. The glyphs they found in Dry Spire ruin were not real. They meant nothing. They weren't from me. But I had carved them, shaped them, placed the blood across the cracks in such a way that they would suggest belief. Not mine. Theirs. Because humans believe what they fear. And when they fear what they don't understand, they make religion from it. So now, I would give them gods. Not powerful ones. Terrible ones. Monsters that leave messages in shattered tongues. Symbols drawn in rot and fur and fossil. And I would give those monsters human hands. They would see my claws, but call them daggers. They would find my silk, but name it thread. They would smell venom and speak of incense. I would write nothing true. And they would read everything. The secondborn watched me from the ledge above chamber 3, head tilted, tail twitching. It had taken to sleeping apart from the firstborn, not far, not in defiance, but like it was testing the limits of the nest. Pushing outward. Curiosity. That was good. The hive would one day need a mind outside of mine. But not yet. The firstborn slept in its usual coil, beneath the bone vault where we stored resin sacks and stripped hides. It had grown leaner in the last moon, not from hunger, but from movement. It was hunting every other night now, alone, catching small things and dragging them to the pits without me needing to signal. Its instinct was still mine. But its rhythm was its own. They would survive me, if they had to. That thought didn't comfort me. It ground into me. Like a stone in the gut. I moved from the hive long before light reached the sky. Above ground, the wind was dry and sharp. The desert would hold no storms for the next 2 days. That was enough. I had marked 3 abandoned sites during my scouting cycles, a collapsed monument in Sector 9, a sunken altar drowned in sand west of the Screamer tunnels, and a half-buried stone platform in Sector 6 long ignored by patrols. They weren't guild-used anymore. They were too strange. Too far from known nesting patterns. Too human. Perfect. I began with the altar. It had once been square. 6 meters wide, 4 long, carved from solid rock and lined with half-erased symbols that didn't match anything in the guild's tablets. The edges had been worn smooth by sandstorms. 3 of its 4 corners had collapsed. The last held. I chose that one. I dragged an old corpse with me, a dead geoz I had taken from the forest edge and wrapped in silk until it hardened into a shell. I cracked the silk open and stripped the body into parts. Not randomly. Ritually. I placed the skull in the corner groove, facing west. I curled the spinal column in a spiral shape beside it. I drove 4 femurs into the sand at equidistant points around the altar, like stakes. I scattered the claws in 2 lines along the base. Then I carved a new glyph. Not like the last. This one curved upward like a ribcage, then broke into thorns. It meant nothing. But it felt like it did. And I carved it over the eye socket of the skull. When the wind hit it just right, the lines inside the skull shadowed the symbol on the floor. It looked intentional. Designed. I left no footprints. I climbed from the ruin along the east wall, tail lifted, dorsal sacs retracted. I pressed my own silk mat over the path I'd used, then burned the mat as I left. No trail. No scent. Only the corpse. Only the glyph. Only interpretation. Then I went to the second site. The monument had cracked in half years ago. Some guild logbooks still called it Watchtower C. But no one used it. Monsters didn't nest here. No species claimed it. That alone made it sacred. I filled its interior with false symbols. Not scratched, layered. I boiled a resin and mixed it with aged Wrath Aloe's blood, dark enough to look old, sticky enough to cling. Then I dipped bones in it. Jagra's teeth. Baroth tail spikes. A single burned piece of Nergigant scale found at the edge of Elder's recess, long discarded. I smeared the resin along the inner walls and embedded the bones into it. They didn't look placed. They looked grown. Sprouted from the walls. Like something inside had tried to leave. I pressed one silk thread against the back wall and laced it with old human scent sweat, oil, preserved from scraps I had taken off the scouts' broken armor weeks ago. They would smell it. They would think, someone stood here. Then they would see the bones. And they would ask, what happened after? At the final site, the sunken platform, I left a helmet. Intact. No blood. But wrapped in silk. Tightly. Like a gift. Inside it, I placed the smallest claw I had. From a hatchling that died before it fed. The claw didn't belong. It had never seen the surface. It had never left the nest. It would confuse the scientists. Not horrify them. Just enough to leave questions. And questions spread faster than fear. When I returned to the hive, the spawns were gone. Both. Not far. I smelled them near the drop vent, both crouched behind the trigger ledge, still. Waiting. I had not told them to wait. I had not left a kill. But they waited anyway. I watched from the side wall as the firstborn hissed once low, deliberate. The secondborn flinched. Then adjusted its stance. It was teaching. I coiled in the shadows above them and watched for 3 hours. They never moved. Not once. Even after it was clear no prey would come. They trained themselves. I exhaled once. Quiet. The guild arrived at the altar 3 days later. I knew before they did. The scout flies hovered too long in Sector 5. Then blinked red in Sector 6. Then disappeared from my sight. They had gone underground. Not after a monster. After a story. I followed from distance. Watched them from the cliff above the stone platform. 6 researchers. 2 with armor. None with weapons drawn. They came with notebooks. Not blades. They knelt at the glyphs. They spoke to each other in whispers. They didn't document in real time. They stood in silence. Looking. Not measuring. They left without sampling the bones. They didn't touch the skull. They didn't collect the femurs. They wrote something down at the ridge, half a kilometer away. And I heard one phrase from the air. Another one. They found the monument 2 days later. This time, they ran. They didn't touch anything. Didn't enter. They stood at the threshold and stared. Then left a red flare. I didn't interfere. Didn't stop them. Didn't strike. This wasn't about death. It was about messages. By the end of the week, 3 patrol sectors had been restricted. Marked for cultural disturbance. The guild's topsoil researchers were diverted from Elder's Recess to Wildspire. No one knew what they were looking for. But they all knew it had been left behind. And worse. They suspected someone was still leading it. I returned to the hive and found the firstborn coiling silk into a corner crevice. Not for hunting. For shaping. It had begun sealing bones into the upper wall of Chamber 3. 2 Jagra's skulls. A Varoth tusk. A cracked egg sac. Arranged evenly. Deliberately. Not food storage. Not instinct. It had seen what I made. And it was copying. Not exactly. Not in the same shape. But in the rhythm. The secondborn watched from below. Not interfering. Just staring. As if waiting for the pattern to mean something. I didn't stop them. They were learning how to speak with more than sound. More than strikes. They would write in bones. They would shape belief. And the guild would see the same thing they had seen in the ruins. Not a monster. A message. Chapter 21, The Shrine That Swallowed Them. There would be no bones if I didn't choose them. Each was taken with purpose. Not because it was sharp, or long, or rare, but because it fit. Because its curve or depth or fracture would mean something when laid beside another. That was how stories worked. A shape, repeated. A placement, echoed. Repeated again, but slightly altered. Then broken. Then replaced. That's what language was, at its core. Not words. Patterns. And now the guild would walk into one. I had been preparing the chamber for a week before I began to draw attention to it. It lay beneath the western ridge, where the sandstone pillars dipped into what the guild called Wind-Cleft Hollow. They used to hunt Diablos above it until 2 disappeared. They blamed a tremor. I knew the truth. The hollow had cracked deeper during the quake, and revealed the underside of the cliffs. It opened into a narrow vertical shaft too deep for wyverns, too angled for flyers, too quiet for large predators. But perfect for me. I widened the cracks by melting small ridges with acid, burning shallow notches into the base of the stone. I didn't break anything that would collapse, just thinned the edges. Let light in, enough to confuse shadows. It looked like nature. But it wasn't. The chamber beneath was narrow at first. Then it curved outward like a funnel. I cleaned it over 4 nights, dragging every stone smooth, sweeping bone dust and insect shells into a slurry that I used to coat the walls. Not clean. Prepared. I hung resin sacks from the upper roots. 7 of them. Each one held a mixture of human-scented cloth and monster blood. When they dried, they would reek not sharply, but deeply. Familiar smells. The kind that would draw attention without setting off alarms. I coated the walls with silk threads, long ones, not sticky. White. Visible. Laid in cross hatches that looked too exact to be random. Strands thickened with dust. Then I began placing the bones. The shrine itself was not at the center of the chamber. It was in the ceiling. A false mistake. The guild would expect traps on the ground. Scattered pieces. Claw marks. Hidden signs in corners. They would not look up. They never did. I built it slowly, layering cracked ribs, fractured shell, teeth. Not arranged in lines. In arcs. Each one forming a semicircle, then another slightly smaller. 7 in all, nested like eye sockets. The center of the circle held no bone, only empty air. But directly beneath it, I placed the piece they would notice first. The symbol. It was carved into the floor. Not deeply. Not carefully. Just enough. It spiraled inward, a single long curve crossing itself twice before ending in a jagged tear. I made it look unfinished. Like whoever carved it had been interrupted. Like someone had been here. Then lost. And then the bodies. I didn't kill new prey for them. I used the remains already stored in chamber 4. 2 Jagras torsos. 1 human arm left behind when the scout was pulled from the ambush zone, severed at the elbow. 3 palico limbs. No heads. No heart meat. Arranged loosely, not stacked. I let the silk look like it had held them once, then rotted. And I left only 1 complete bone untouched, a femur, human. It was polished. By water. By time. Not blood. I placed it beside the spiral. Aligned with its direction. A signal to the eye, this belongs. Even if it didn't. Especially if it didn't. The trap came last. Not a reaper strike. No ambush. No screens. The chamber was the kill. I sealed the upper entrance with a resin curtain just thin enough to crack under the weight of a full team. Then I spun silk nets beneath the walls, tensioned, coiled, shaped into sound traps. Not to restrain. To trigger. When they walked across the correct point, the silk would snap. And above them, the circle of bones would drop. Not to impale. To surround. To make sound. To break pattern. To shatter their illusion of control. They would think they had found something old. Something ritualistic. Something that had once meant something. Then it would move. And they would realize. It still does. I waited 5 days. Then baited the trail. Not with blood. With signs. I returned to the upper path 2 nights later and carved shallow scratches into the stone, marking what could be mistaken as movement patterns from a large, wounded wyvern. Tail strikes, claw scrapes, wing beats too erratic to be Barath. Then I smeared diluted Nersilla fluid onto a broken root, just enough to match venom trace readings the guild would recognize. I placed a strip of torn scale gypsyross, old from an old corpse, and let it curl in the heat, half hidden. And I broke one of the bones above the shrine chamber entrance. Clean fracture. No blood. Placed just wrong enough to demand inspection. I didn't stay. I returned to the hive and waited. They came at noon. 2 scouts. 1 handler. And a hunter. No armor. But they brought marking tools. Cameras. Breath masks. Lanterns. They had come to document. Not defend. Perfect. I watched them from a thin opening behind the back wall, tunneled from a side passage I had carved weeks earlier. It held a single breath-wide slit, masked with soil and bone paste. They would never see it. But I saw everything. They stopped at the entrance. The handler spoke first. The scouts nodded. The hunter didn't speak. He went in first. That was good. The hunter would understand fastest. That meant he'd fall hardest. They moved through the outer chamber slowly. Not afraid. Curious. The scent drew them forward, the rot, the silk, the blood that smelled like it wasn't fresh but wasn't dead. They passed the claw marks. Stopped at the femur. Spoke softly. One scout reached for the spiral. The handler said no. They circled it instead. Cameras blinked. Lanterns hissed. Then they looked up. They saw the circle. The hunter stepped beneath it. Looked down at the spiral. Back up. He raised a hand. To touch it. To test it. He stepped into the trigger line. The silk snapped. The ceiling collapsed in silence. No rocks. Just bones. The circle of ribs fell in arcs, crashing down around him, not on him. Not a strike. A sound. A ring. The hunter didn't scream. But the handler did. The lantern dropped. Glass cracked. Light spilled across the spiral. The camera clattered to the floor. Then the shriek came. The palico. Small. Panicked. It ran. Straight into the net. It snapped. Only once. Just enough to tear its shoulder. Not fatal. Intentional. Because they had to leave. They ran. Didn't finish documenting. Didn't collect the bones. Didn't touch the spiral. They ran back through the tunnel mouth, dragging the palico, the handler whispering under breath, the hunter silent, the scouts stumbling. They didn't return that night. Or the next. I returned to the chamber in the dark, once the wind sealed their scent. The bones had landed in a ring. Imperfect. Scattered. But enough. Enough to look like they had never moved. Like they'd always been there. The shrine had reset itself. No trap reset. No silk to replace. Just belief. The spiral had begun to stain. Not from blood. From boots. Their panic had left prints partial, broken, overlapping. I left them. Let them age. They would look like another team had been here. Another team that had left worse than scared. The guild would call it a shrine. They would blame a cult. Not a monster. Not yet. But they would return. Not to study. To pray. To find meaning in the pattern. And when they did, they would bring more bodies. And I would be waiting. Not to kill them. To teach them what it means to fear a god they made by accident. Chapter 22, where the second symbol waited. It had to be the same. Not similar. Not like. The same. The curve of the spiral had to match the last one precisely 6.5 turns, no more. Each arc spaced by the same claw width radius, same depth, same scratch pressure, same groove angle. Even the break at the end, the jagged finish, couldn't be drawn freely. It had to be shaped as if it were broken by the same interruption. A breath caught in the same throat. A scream stopped at the same moment. The guild had to believe this was no coincidence. They had to recognize it. And in recognizing it, they would begin to fear pattern. That was the purpose of the second shrine. The first shrine had worked better than I expected. They hadn't touched the bones. They hadn't cleared the chamber. They hadn't posted guards. But they marked it. I followed a field researcher to the map tent 2 nights ago, too far from their main encampment, careless with where she left her scrolls. She wrote in quick notes. Sharp strokes. Glyphs drawn in shorthand. Observation Site R, Sector 6. Do not investigate without ritual protocol. Symbol identical to dry spire pattern. Cross-reference altar markings, possible continuity. Local predator unknown. Pack size unclear. Do not disturb site. I didn't disturb her. I didn't kill her. She was already doing my work for me. She just didn't know it. The second shrine would not be in a collapsed tunnel. It had to be somewhere older. More visible. The guild needed to see that the symbol wasn't bound to a death site. Not just a trap. Not just where things end. It had to be placed where it could have been all along. Where humans should have found it years ago, but didn't. Somewhere half familiar. Overlooked. So I chose the stone orchard. The guild calls it Sector 7, uneven plains. To them, it's dead terrain. Flat rock formations curved by ancient erosion. Shale bluffs lined with dead roots and sandstone ridges too brittle to climb. But to me, it is a graveyard. Not for monsters. For ideas. The place has been emptied, mapped, abandoned. There are no patrols. No scout flies hover here. No traps are set, no bounties issued. They've already decided, nothing is here. That was the key. I entered the stone orchard alone. The ground cracked beneath me in long, quiet pulses, deep-set lines carved not by creatures, but by time. The roots that once broke through here had died, petrified, fused into stone. Each ridge bent like a spine. I followed the curve of one long stone wall, then stopped. There. A natural basin. Circular. 6 meters wide, 1 meter deep. Not carved. Just sunk. But it looked like a site. Like something used it once. And now, it would be used again. I placed no body in this shrine. No bones. No bait. That was important. It had to look like a place that had already been used. Something too old to explain. Something ancient that the guild simply hadn't noticed until now. So I began with the spiral. It took a full night to shape. Not from difficulty. From precision. Each claw stroke had to match the original exactly. I dug grooves with the same forelimb, the same pressure, the same angle. I left slight imperfections in the same places. A nick halfway through the third arc. A depth shift between the fifth and sixth. A shake at the tip of the seventh. I measured each line by memory. I didn't guess. I remembered. When it was done, I stepped back and dragged one claw across the basin floor to mark my own exit. One single print. Deep. Heavy. Then I vanished into the stone. I returned 2 nights later. Not to change it. To add questions. I tore a single page from the guild's own field guide taken from a dead scout weeks ago, folded and carried through acid to erase blood scent. I crushed it, flattened it, soaked it in water, then pressed it into the spiral's edge. Like someone had dropped it. Or left it. The page showed a map of the upper southern region. Nothing important. But the paper itself was gilt. And it would imply presence. That someone else had already been here. Had seen it. And didn't return. That was enough. I left the shrine untouched after that. Returned to the hive. The spawns met me near chamber 4. They didn't speak. They didn't hiss. But the second-born lowered its tail. The firstborn stepped aside. I passed between them and slept beneath the resin canopy, the spiral still fresh in my mind. The guild found the site 4 days later. I saw it from the cliffs, their small team of 6, no weapons drawn, only lanterns and scrolls. They moved too slowly for hunters. They had come to study. One scout knelt beside the spiral. Another walked the basin's edge in full circles, counting the grooves aloud. The handler crouched and unfolded the wet page. His hands shook slightly. They marked the site in their logs. Then left without touching anything else. No one laughed. No one speculated. No one dismissed. They believed they had found a forgotten place. They believed someone had known about it. And they would wonder why it looked exactly like the one beneath the cliffs. And the one in Dry Spire. 3 shrines. Same symbol. Different materials. Different locations. All untouched. All hidden. When they returned to their camp, they posted new directives. A patrol team spoke aloud what I already knew. Multiple glyphs in unconnected sectors. Not monster-related. Cartographer review requested. Suspicion of non-guild human presence, possibly ancient. Recommend lockdown of historical ruins until cleared. It had worked. They had removed monsters from the theory. Now they were chasing people. They would ask who left these symbols. Where did they go? Why are there no footprints? Why only the spiral? And the longer they asked, the less they'd see me. The more they'd believe in something else. The hive was quiet when I returned. The firstborn had begun shaping its own kill chamber near the ceiling. No instruction. Just action. It had dragged bone fragments and cracked shell casings into a crescent above the resin shelf. It wasn't a trap. It was a shrine. The second-born had begun shaping symbols in the soil. Not precise. Not meaningful. Just curves. Scratches. Shapes. But it was trying. I let them continue. I didn't interrupt. I watched as the bones began to fall into place. Not because I placed them. Because now, the hive understood. Chapter 23, The Flags That Were Not Theirs. It started with color. The guild's marker flags came in 6 hues. Bright. Deliberate. Designed not to blend but to be seen. Red for patrol zones. Green for safe paths. Yellow for known monster routes. Blue for mineral deposits. Black for cautionary mapping boundaries. White for surveyed historical sites. Each one stood for control. Order. Human awareness layered over wilderness. If a flag was planted, it meant the guild had seen what lay beneath. Catalogued it. Claimed it. Made it theirs. I wanted to take that certainty from them. Quietly. Without war. I wanted them to doubt the edges of their maps. And it began with one patrol. They called it a recon loop. A standard circuit through sectors 3, 4, and the outskirts of 7. The team was small, 2 scouts, a handler, and 1 cartographer assigned to remap weather-warped ridges. I'd followed them before, silent, distant, high above the ridgelines. They weren't hunters. They didn't carry bow guns or glaives. They wore padded leathers and carried notebooks wrapped in wax cloth. Their goal was not to confront, only to mark. to observe, to categorize, to measure, and then move on. But this time, they had lingered in Sector 4. The southern shelf had cracked an old salt flat eroded by wind and beast traffic. It wasn't dangerous. But the map lines had shifted. They sent out flags. 5 of them. 2 yellow. 2 black. 1 white. I watched them place each one. Hammered into the soft edge of rock with quiet taps. Then they moved on. I waited. Let the dust settle. Let the wind erase their scent. Let the silence return. Then I approached. The flags were tall. Fiberglass shafts wrapped in rubber grip, the colors stitched into triangular cloth flaps hanging from steel rings. A human hand could remove them easily. I used claws. Clean, smooth motions. No tearing. No damage. Not yet. I carried each one back into the ridge hollows. Set them down like broken spines. One by one. And replaced them. My markers were different. I carved them out of bone-thin struts from Kestodon legs, sharpened and sanded. I bound the bases in silk and wrapped the ends in pale hide, bleached, stained with mineral dust to mimic the flag shapes. Then I painted. Not bright. Not bold. Just enough. A faint yellow smudge on one. Black streaks on another. The white I made from dried resin and sand. Each color was recognizable, if faded. As if aged. As if older than the flags the guild had left. Then I added the spirals. Not in the center. Not obvious. Hidden. Etched on the bone shafts near the base, just above the silk wrap. Tiny. Precise. You'd have to pick the marker up to notice. You'd have to remove it from the ground. And then, you'd see. By nightfall, all 5 flags had been replaced. The originals were gone. Burned. Ash scattered into a sealed crevice. No traces. Only new flags. Old looking. Wrong feeling. Same positions. Same colors. But not theirs. I didn't wait for them to return. They weren't meant to discover it immediately. The illusion had to settle. Let them walk their next circuit. Expect familiarity. Then see change. The slower the realization, the sharper the fear. I returned to the hive at sunrise. The spawns were restless. The second-born paced the resin ridge, nose twitching, tail low. It had grown taller. Quieter. It rarely hissed now. It was listening more. Watching. The firstborn remained near the resin walls of Chamber 5 where it had been weaving bone into rough arches. Not symmetrical. But organized. I approached, and the firstborn stepped back. It let me see. Let me smell. It had begun copying the spiral. Not perfectly. Not in soil or stone. But in air. The bones curved in partial arcs, hanging from silk thread. They wouldn't survive movement. Would break at the first tremor. But the pattern was there. A beginning. A mimic. Soon, it would become invention. 2 days passed. The patrol returned. I shadowed them from the high cliff again, silent, still. They walked with confidence. At first. Then they stopped. The first scout bent toward the nearest flag. Frowned. He didn't touch it. But he noticed. The second followed. Touched the silk base. Paused. Said something short. The cartographer crouched. He picked the flag up. Turned it. Saw the spiral. Didn't speak. But his breathing changed. I heard it from above. Quiet. Sharp. Not confusion. Not disbelief. Recognition. They found all 5. Didn't remove them. Didn't replace them. They circled back. Slowly. I followed. They spoke low-clipped phrases, numbers, map coordinates. They didn't understand what they had found. Not yet. But they understood one thing. These weren't theirs. They had come back expecting to see guild flags. They'd found replacements. In the exact same places. As if someone had followed them. Copied them. And overwritten them. Silently. With a message they could not read. That night, I heard the report. From the cliffs above the field tent. The handler who had found the 3rd spiral was present. So was the cartographer. Flag integrity breached. Markers replaced with forgeries. Unknown material origin. Possible bone. Silk wrapping consistent with Nersilla variants. Spiral insignia matches glyph site R and orchard site. Conclusion, deliberate territorial mimicry. Unknown actor. Highly mobile. High ecological literacy. They didn't say monster. They didn't say man. They didn't say cult. They didn't know. That was enough. I returned to the hive. And began shaping new flags. 10 of them. Smaller. Sharpened. To be placed not beside sites. But in camps. Chapter 24, The Journal That Shouldn't Exist. The first lie was paper. It was never supposed to survive here, not long. Not in Wildspire's heat, not beneath the pulsing shifts of salt-heavy wind. Yet it did. Tucked inside their satchels, sealed under waxed cloth, scrawled across rough parchment laced with fiber string. The guild wrote down everything. Footsteps. Wind shifts. Signs of tail drag. Pile shapes. Carcass condition. Tooth marks. It wasn't for memory. It was for command. If it was on paper, it was real. They believed in the page more than in what bled in front of them. So I gave them a journal. Not mine. Theirs. I began with the pages. The old scout's satchel still held several blank field pages, though most were soaked with acid runoff from his torn chest plate. I pulled the dry sheets carefully from the center seam, one by one, letting the edges fray naturally as I worked them out from the waxed core. 7 intact pages. 3 half-burned. 1 sheet torn diagonally, still stained with an ink trace. A date, the curve of a letter, maybe a zone number. That was perfect. Not clean. Found. Next came the cover. Guild journals followed a pattern: stitched canvas covers reinforced with stiff hide strips along the spine, one corner stamped with a seal. I had seen enough left behind. Enough stolen from the nests of monsters who killed their carriers. Enough abandoned in packs too bloody to reclaim. I didn't need a whole one. I only needed to make one look real. I took the hide of a Kestodon's inner leg, thin enough to bend, thick enough to survive desert handling, and cut it into a rough rectangle. I boiled it until it shrank. Then I folded it twice, pressed the folds flat between 2 stones, and left it under weight for a full day. When it dried, it held shape. I punched holes into the spine with a sharpened Jagra's tooth. Laced them shut with silk thread, dulled with ash. Then, on the corner, I used a guild stamp. Not forged. Taken. The brass insignia I had recovered from a dead surveyor weeks before. Still intact, marked with his department historical records, Sub-Region C. I heated it in coals, pressed it into the hide. Let it blister and scar. Now the book looked real. A true journal. Not fresh. Not new. But believable. Next came the words. I had read enough guild documents to know how they wrote. Not with urgency. With structure. Time first. Sector second. Subject third. A ritual of headings and bullet points. No emotion. Just fragments. Sharp and short. They never guessed. They only observed. But this time, they would guess. Because this time, the spiral would not be found in the field. It would be found on paper. I began the entries slowly. Page 1. Date, April 13th, 05. Time, 1630. Sector, 6, Southwest Ridge. Spiral. Same depth. Same angle. 6.5 turns again. I measured this time. Scratch depth identical to site R. 2 more discovered in dry spire. Handlers didn't approve excavation. Said it was outside primary directive. Not a coincidence. Simple. Measured. Dull. Exactly how they write. Then I added the contradiction. Page 2. Date, April 14th, 05. Time, 1030. Sector, 9, Sand Root Split. This one was older. Edges softened. Bone dust settled in grooves. Spiral tilted northeast. Not aligned with wind shear. Found vertebrae placed beside it. Not native bones. Arranged in curve. Not a pile. A shape. I didn't report this one. That was the infection. The beginning of doubt. Of secrecy. They would read it and think, who wrote this? Not just a scout. Someone who saw more than they told command. That's what made it contagious. Page 3 was where the shape of belief began. Date, April 15th, 05. Spiral was inside a burrow this time. Not natural. Dug by something bipedal. No paw marks. No tail drag. Just the spiral. No guild records of any intelligent carving behavior in this biome. Not from monsters. So who's making them? I left the question unfinished. Let it echo. Let them fill it with what they feared. The rest of the pages were variations. Repetitions. Fragments. Symbols repeating at 6.5 rotations. Bones arranged in crescent arcs Y. Handler thinks it's vandalism. But we're 400 kilometers from last civilian site. Someone is showing us something. But not who. Saw a shape in the corner of the hollow. Gone when I turned. Could have been a wing. If this is a message, who is it for? Then on the final page the torn one. They're not drawing spirals for us. We just happened to find them. I didn't write a name. The guild would invent one. I sealed the journal with a strip of resin-stiffened silk. Not tight. Loose enough to crack when picked up. I wrapped the outside in cloth dyed with faded blood and salt, then pressed it into a cracked box. The box was metal. Rusted. A guild supply case scavenged from a ruined outpost half collapsed during a Diablo's stampede. They'd never reclaim it. I buried it beside a supply path. Shallow. Just beneath the sand. Where wind would uncover it. Where scout flies would hover. Where someone would say, "Did we forget this?" And then they'd open it. I placed it during high sun, when shadows were shortest and patrols thinned. The scouts had passed through an hour earlier. I followed their footprints, found a place where they'd stopped marked by a snapped twig and half-erased chalk note on stone. I chose that place. Familiar. Already marked. Already mapped. Now rewritten. I returned to the hive before nightfall. The second-born had taken to shaping bone circles in the chamber sand imperfect spirals. Not copying now. practicing. The firstborn didn't interfere. It carved still. Not in patterns. In angles. Tight, repetitive lines on the walls. Some were symbols. Some just rhythms. It had begun understanding repetition. Not for a trap. For meaning. I didn't interfere. I let them write. 2 nights passed. Then I heard the scout flies. They found the box. Not the hunter team. Not the researchers. Command. 2 field commanders arrived in Sector 4. Not to hunt. To observe. They crouched beside the supply box. Didn't open it right away. They dusted it off. Inspected the seal. Then one peeled back the silk. Opened the lid. The journal lay wrapped. As I'd left it. He pulled it free. Unwrapped it. Stopped moving. They didn't speak for 8 minutes. They turned each page slowly. No commentary. No orders. No accusations. Only the sound of paper shifting in wind. Then the second one said, "Do you know who wrote this?" The first didn't answer. They carried the journal back. Didn't leave a flag. Didn't mark the site. Didn't report by flare. That meant they'd bring it upstairs. Out of field teams. Into administration. Into theory. Back at the hive, the firstborn had begun dragging resin sacks into Chamber 6. It hadn't asked permission. It had chosen the new chamber on its own. That wasn't nesting behavior. It was division. Separation. Preparation. It was learning to spread. To shape new places. The secondborn had stopped drawing spirals in sand. It was carving now. Claw against stone. The lines were rough. But they looped. Repeated. Cracked at the 7th arc. They were almost right. Soon, they wouldn't need me. Soon, they would write without me. And the guild wouldn't know if the symbols came from the field, the stone, or each other. Because the spiral wasn't a trap anymore. It was a story. And now, it was being told by more than one hand. Chapter 25, 2 Voices in the Dark. The first journal had worked. Too well. They had accepted it not as a forgery, not even as a lie. They treated it as real. Unquestioned. They debated its meaning but not its authorship. No one asked where it came from. No one doubted how it survived. They discussed content, spiral placement, psychological state. But not once had I heard them say the word I had expected. Fabricated. They believed too fast. That was dangerous. Belief that fast was unstable. If it was undone, it would collapse into rejection. I didn't want rejection. I wanted fracture. So I gave them a second voice. Not contradiction. Not denial. Not correction. Friction. That was the goal. A new journal, written in the same ink. Same cloth binding. Same guild cover. Same type of paper faded on one edge, sharp on the other. But the hand was different. The tone was looser. Still clinical, but with fatigue in the lines. Weariness in the rhythm. Sloppier date headers. Underlines. Doubts. They would read this one and say, "This is also real." But they don't agree. And then the argument would live not between guild and monster, but inside the guild itself. I found the corpse 2 days before. Deep in the sink chamber, buried under collapsed root stone, left untouched since before I woke in this body. His journal was gone, eaten by mold, but his belt still held a cracked noteboard guild stamped, sealed in bone casing, waterproof. The name was carved into the clasp. DS, Harrow. Records Division. Not Combat. Subregion C, same as the first forged journal. Perfect. I took the casing. Burned the mold. Gutted the inside. Cut new parchment from scavenged survey maps blank on the back. Then I stitched the new journal. Softer spine. Same size. Stamped again with the insignia I stole before. Then I wrote. Page 1. Date, April 16, 05. Time, 1200. They sent me to cross-reference the original glyph records from Dry Spire. But this spiral, it's not a glyph. It's animal. Every record we have from pre-guild sites uses stone tools. Human shapes. This isn't that. The scratches are curved without lift. There's no start point. No stop. Like a claw was dragged in a continuous arc. Not carved. Edged. Then the page ends. Not with summary. Just space. As if the writer had paused. Not to rest. To think. I bled into the second page with just enough doubt. The others think it's a message. I think it's a scar. Not left for us. Not meant to be read. There are no initials. No repetition. No symbols around the spiral. It's always alone. You don't write alone unless no one's listening. Or unless you're not writing at all. Then I struck out the last sentence. Not erased. Just scratched. Deep enough to show anger. Let them see the emotion. Let them believe the author was unsure. Not controlled. Not fake. Human. Page 3 shifts tone. Date, April 17, 05. Found a second spiral. Not in stone. In mud. It dried before we saw it. Lines curled sharp. Fragile. Broke when we stepped in. Scout called it an invitation. I think it was just a track. What if this isn't a pattern at all? What if it's just what something leaves behind? What if it's not a message but a trail? I added no answers. Let the reader ask. Final page. If it's not meant for us, why do we keep seeing it? Maybe we're the ones following it. Maybe we're the ones being read. Then I left it blank. A full page. Empty. No sign off. No signature. No name. Let them search for one. Let them compare the two journals. Let them debate. Now it had to be found. But not like the first. The first had been planted. Buried. Hidden. Recovered by chance. This one would not hide. It would be left. Too openly. Too perfectly. Like someone wanted it found. And that would make it worse. I waited for them to return to the same patrol loop. Sector 5. The riverbank just east of Jagra's Gulch. Old sand beds marked by dead trees and 4 flag posts, 3 yellow, 1 black. They'd returned there 2 nights ago for reassessment. Took notes. Didn't dig. I slipped into their path at midnight. No moon. I placed the journal in the center of a flat stone. No wrapping. No lock. Just a weight on the cover, a single cracked vertebra. Not bloody. Not recent. Just out of place. Wrong species for the area. They would see it. They would see the journal. They would guess. And guessing was always worse than knowing. I hid in the cliff above for 16 hours. Slept once. Woke to their steps. 3 scouts. 2 handlers. 1 cartographer, same man who read the first spiral journal. He saw the second before anyone else. Didn't speak. Just walked forward, picked it up. Opened it. Paused. Not shock. Recognition. The kind of silence that comes when something connects. He handed it to a handler. She turned the pages. Slowly. Then closed it. This isn't the same author. Are you sure? Look at the formatting. Ink is heavier. Shorter margin spacing. And the last page. She tapped the end. Didn't finish the sentence. They didn't take it back to the outpost. They brought it straight to base. That was what I wanted. Back at the hive, the second born was drawing spirals again. Not in sand. On the wall. With claws. The lines were deeper now. Tighter. It had reached 6 turns. Still uneven. But near. I did not interfere. I turned to the firstborn. It was asleep beside a pile of shattered horn. Kuluyaku. 2 kills. Gathered. Eaten. Stored. Its claws were stained with color. From sap. From bark. From old scroll fragments I had left near the surface. It had begun dragging symbols from paper onto skin. Replicating not just patterns, but language. It didn't know what the words meant. But it copied them anyway. As if meaning didn't matter. Only the act of marking. That was enough. That was power. By week's end, the guild had divided their conclusions. Half said the first journal confirmed intelligent actors leaving symbols. Half said the second proved monster behavior. They didn't know the symbols were the same. They didn't realize the stories were shaped to conflict. They hadn't seen the third journal yet. I hadn't written it. Not yet. But I would. Not to lie. Not to confirm. But to ask a question neither author had. What if there are more than 2 voices? Chapter 26, A Body in the Spiral. Death had always been part of it. It had to be. The guild only looked when something bled. Fear, alone, never drew them far. But corpses that changed things. Corpses turned the theoretical into something solid. Tangible. Heavy in the hand. Real. They catalogued wounds. They measured bite angles. They recorded blood sprays like they were runes. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't map, was placement. A corpse in the wild is an event. A corpse arranged is a statement. And now I would give them one. Not subtle. Not quiet. But still true enough to believe. The corpse had to be human. That was the only way they'd treat it as sacred. A monster corpse would just be logged. Burned. Dismissed as territorial behavior. But if it was theirs, a body of one of their own, marked not by fangs or claws, but by deliberate surroundings, they'd stop. They'd think. They'd fear the same spiral in a new way. Not just symbol. Not just map. But altar. I chose the scout 2 days before. She was small. Quick. Barely armored. She never traveled alone, but the team rotated in a 4-hour pattern during their low-rank patrols, and she always took the same route through the stone orchard during her final loop. The others called her RO. Short for Rosalind, or maybe just a nickname. She marked trees with chalk. Yellow. A weak color. Faded fast in wind. I followed her for 3 loops before acting. Not to watch her. To study her absence. I needed to know how long she'd go unnoticed. 4 hours. Maybe 5. That would be enough. When I moved, I didn't strike fast. I waited until she crossed the lower ridge path. She bent to mark a stone. I dropped behind her. Silent. One claw around her neck. Not breaking. Just pressing. She struggled. Tried to cry out. Didn't get the chance. I injected a slow dose of paralytic venom from the base of my tail. It wouldn't kill. Just silence. Then I dragged her. Not far. Just far enough. Into the place I had prepared days before. A hollow cut from dead stone. Naturally formed. Dry. Cracked. Shaped like an old basin once used to collect water long since emptied. The walls curved inward. The floor was shallow. And in its center, a spiral. Already carved. Already waiting. I placed her there slowly. Not broken. Not flayed. Preserved. No violence. No gore. Only intention. She lay curled on her side, arms against her chest, body turned toward the spiral but not touching it. Like she had fallen beside it. Or reached for it. Her mouth was open slightly. One eye half closed. Sleep. That's what it would look like. Asleep beside something sacred. Then I built the shrine. Bones first. Not hers. Old Jagra's bones, stripped and cleaned, arranged in a wide ring around the spiral. Not touching. Not stacked. Just placed. 4 ribs. 1 cracked skull. 2 long claws, sharpened to points and pressed into the ground facing inward. Then silk. I pulled threads across the spiral tight, thin, just enough to shimmer faintly under light. 3 strands. All in parallel. Not sticky. Just visible. They wouldn't find. They would suggest. Then I placed the journal. The third one. Not in her hand. Not beside her. At her feet. Open. Only 1 page filled. Date, April 18, 05. I saw it move today. Not the spiral. The thing behind it. It didn't chase me. I followed it. I think it's waiting for something. I think I am, too. The rest of the pages were blank. I stained the corner with blood. Not hers. Rathian. Old. Browned. Enough to look dried. Then I left her. Alive. But she would not move for hours. Long enough for the guild to find her. They'd assume she died. At first. Until they checked. Until they felt for her pulse and found it still there. Then the questions would start. Why wasn't she killed? Why didn't it feed? Why this place? Why this symbol again? I returned to the hive. The firstborn hissed low as I entered. Not alarm. Recognition. The secondborn crouched beside it, claws against the resin wall, finishing another spiral, this one smaller. Tighter. More precise. 6 full turns. A break at the edge. I looked closer. This one was carved beside a pile of bones. Small ones. Not for prey. For offering. I hadn't taught them this. They were learning it on their own. Or repeating what they saw. Was there a difference? The guild found her 7 hours later. A search team. Not hunters. Medics. 2 field doctors. 1 cartographer. 1 scoutmaster. They approached carefully. One stepped into the silk threads. They snapped. Didn't trap. Didn't hurt. But the sound echoed. Thin. High. Wrong. They all froze. Then the cartographer saw the spiral. He stepped back. The scoutmaster approached the girl. Kneeling. 2 fingers on her neck. Then a whisper. Alive. Then louder. She's alive. Confusion. They didn't touch the journal. Not yet. They took her first. Lifted her gently. One medic supported the head. Another the legs. They didn't let her wake in the shrine. They carried her out. Then they picked up the book. And for a long time no one spoke. Back at camp, the story spread. Quickly. Rose alive. Found at one of the spiral sites. There was a journal. Same style as the others. She couldn't remember anything. No wounds. No struggle. She was just placed there. Now it wasn't just belief. It was ritual. The guild began sealing spiral sites with warning tape. Not for threat containment. For respect. As if they were graves. Or temples. They didn't move the symbols. They didn't clean the bones. They didn't erase the grooves in the stone. They began calling them by new names. Not sites. Not events. They called them altars. And they called the person leaving them the spiral witness. No longer an accident. No longer a myth. A title. An identity. They had made their god. And it had spared one of their own. Chapter 27, The Second Survivor. Her name was Tella. That's what they called her, at least. Sometimes Tell, if they were speaking fast, or Echo if they were calling her from a distance. A scout from the South team. Never led, but always chosen. Quiet. Reliable. Not weak. Just unassuming. She was the perfect one to be spared. Because no one would think she deserved it. And because no one would believe she lied. I had watched her for a full week. Her pattern was strict. She mapped the dead routes along the cliff line between sectors 2 and 5, moving in consistent passes with a single partner, Benton, heavier, louder, always walking ahead. He broke trail. She marked it. They never split far. But I didn't need far. Only a moment. Only once. I prepared the site 2 days before. A narrow ravine behind the stone pillars that marked the old burn path, a place the guild didn't patrol anymore. It wasn't dangerous. Just empty. No monster activity. No nests. Only sharp shale and dried vines. I'd already carved the spiral. This time, into wood. Not stone. Not soil. The base of a dead tree, once struck by a wrath aloes plume, long charred. Its bark was black, its rings shattered, but the trunk still stood. I shaped the spiral with slow, careful strikes, pressing in with my claw and dragging slowly, repeating the arc 6 times, then breaking hard on the 7th turn. The grooves were shallow. Sharp-edged. Like something with intelligence had carved it. Not a beast. Not a storm. Someone. Then I prepared the body site. No corpse this time. That was the point. She would be the difference. The one who came back. I strung 3 threads of silk across the lower slope of the ravine, barely tensioned, enough to brush skin if walked through. Not traps. Not webbing. Just warning. And at the center of the ravine, I placed the journal. The 4th. Not full. Just 3 pages. Date, April 21st, 05. I thought it was following us. But now I think we're the ones crossing its paths. It doesn't make spirals to lead. It makes them to mark. To remember. We're walking through its memories. 2nd page. The last spiral was deeper. The grooves aren't random. They increase in pressure after the 4th turn. I tested with ink. The flow gathers at the 6th arc, then breaks. Like it wants something to fill it. Like it's waiting to be completed. 3rd page. Tella says she dreamed about it. I think I believe her. I wrapped the book in old guild cloth, placed it beside the spiral. Then I waited. The next morning, she passed through the ravine. Not alone. Benton was ahead. As always. I was already in place, tunneled into a cracked section of the eastern slope, hidden behind the stone rise. From there, I could watch. I could act. And I did. She paused. Benton walked ahead. 10 paces. I moved. Fast. Clean. No claws. Just a strike to the neck pressure point between the tendon and the collarbone. Not a wound. A hold. Then a pulse of venom. Low dose. She collapsed soundlessly. Not limp. Not unconscious. Paralyzed. Eyes still open. Breath slow. Aware, but still. That was necessary. She had to see the spiral. I carried her in both arms. Set her down beside the journal. Beside the tree. Placed one hand under her palm. Opened her fingers. Pressed them into the bark. Into the edge of the spiral. Let the oils from her skin sink into the grooves. Then left her. I took nothing. No blood. No signs of struggle. No symbols on her body. Only proximity. That was enough. Benton didn't return for 13 minutes. That was the gap. That was how long it took before someone realized she wasn't behind him. By the time he backtracked, she was already being found. He didn't see me. I was above, buried in shale and silence. He saw her body. Cried out. Ran forward. Stopped when he saw the spiral. Didn't touch her. Radioed command. Didn't check her pulse. He assumed she was dead. The response came fast. 4 riders. 3 medics. 1 handler. They approached slow. Careful. The spiral caught their attention immediately. One of them knelt. Inspected the grooves. Same pattern. Another opened the cloth. The journal. The page about Tella. The mention of the dream. She's writing about herself. No. This doesn't match her handwriting. Then someone else saw it happen. They didn't ask why her name was in it. They asked who had written it. They didn't remove the book. They didn't touch the spiral. They carried her back. Her eyes were moving. That was all. At base, the report didn't go public. But rumors did. Tella had been marked. Not hurt. Not hunted. But selected. They said she'd whispered something in her sleep. That she spoke of light under stone. Of a spiral drawn in fire. Of a voice with no mouth that asked, not in words, but in presence. Do you understand me? She didn't answer. She only cried. That night, 2 guild members, both handlers, visited the spiral site alone. They didn't log the trip. They didn't bring backup. They stood in the ravine for 20 minutes. One touched the tree. One knelt beside the book. They said nothing. They left in silence. The next day, they began carving their own spirals in the side of the camp storage tents. Not large. Not visible. But they were there. 7 curves. Then a break. The infection was no longer just mine. Now it had a human shape. It had a ritual. They had seen 2 spared. Not fighters. Not leaders. Scouts. Observers. And that was the message they chose to hear. The spiral witness does not punish the watchful. And they began to watch. More spirals appeared in guild barracks. Carved in the corners of maps. Drawn in chalk behind ration crates. scratched into the lining of helmets. Quiet. Secret. Spoken about only in low breath, with eyes lowered. They did not fear the spiral now. They feared being unseen by it. At the hive, the second-born had begun carving spirals into the walls above the food chambers. Not visible to prey. Not functional. But consistent. Always 7 turns. Always a break. The firstborn had shaped 2 new altars in the east tunnel. I hadn't told it to. It used bones I hadn't touched. And silk I hadn't spun. I watched it finish one. It didn't turn to me. It stood still. Tail low. As if waiting to be seen. They were not copying. They were participating. The spiral wasn't mine anymore. It was ours. Chapter 28, The Spiral Breaks Beneath Him. He wasn't the first to believe in it. But he was the first to act on it. That's what mattered. His name was Theron, a handler from the upper sector teams, assigned to logistics and ration planning, but lately attached to the spiral tasking group. They called it that now. They didn't use it officially. But the name spread through the camps, written in short form, STG. Whispered as a thing above orders, outside protocol. He wasn't a scout. He wasn't a cartographer. He was a witness. That's what they said when he started carving spirals into the inside of his field journal, 4 by the last count, each one slightly altered. On the 6th night, he stopped carrying his sword. Said it wasn't needed. That the spiral witness protected those who listened. And the others, quiet, unsure, tired of questions, let him believe it. Because they wanted to believe it, too. Because belief was easier than fear. But belief has weight. And he would carry it too far. I watched him long before they did. Handlers rarely leave camp alone. But Theron walked the edge paths often now. Said it gave him peace. Said he felt the spiral more clearly where the wind moved in circles. I followed at a distance. Never near. Never too close. I didn't need to touch him. I only needed to wait. He had already been marked. Not by claw. Not by venom. By idea. And he would prove it. He visited the shrine in the Eastern Hollow 7 times in 3 days. The one I'd built for the first journal, the spiral carved into rock, dry bones arranged like forgotten ribs, silk threads long since snapped. He stood over it for hours. Once, he sat cross-legged beside it. Said nothing. But he pressed his palm to the stone. Held it there for minutes. Then left a strip of cloth behind gild issue, used to bind wounds. He didn't place it with ceremony. Just left it, as if he believed the spiral would understand. I knew what would come next. The guild didn't. Not until the screams. The Barath had been hunting north. It wasn't near the shrine. But storms change that. A shift in pressure, a thunder pulse, a vibration through the cracked shale enough to drive the beast off its usual path. Theron didn't run. They said later that he could have. He had seen it coming. He had heard it roar, long before it arrived. He had time. But he didn't run. Because he believed the spiral protected those who listened. So he stood. Not defiantly. Not bravely. Trusting. And that was how the Barath broke him. It didn't bite. Didn't smash him against the walls. It slammed its side into the spiral chamber and collapsed half the ridge. Stones fell. Silk snapped. Bones shattered. The spiral cracked down the center, shattered in a burst of dry dust. Theron was still inside. Not mangled. Just buried. Alive for minutes. Died under weight. Under his belief. They found him half a day later. The patrol came first. Heard the Barath had passed. Came to check the altar site. Saw the broken stones. Dug through the rock. Found his hand first. Palm out. Fingers curled inward, not in defense. In reaching. Like he had tried to hold onto the spiral as it broke. They brought him back in silence. Didn't cover his body. Didn't clean his uniform. They needed everyone to see. The rumors started immediately. He trusted it. He went there for guidance. It didn't protect him. And then worse. The spiral punished him. He broke it. He touched it too long. He wrote his own. And then came fear, not of monsters. Not of shrines. But of imitation. They began erasing spirals. Silently. At night. One handler removed the carved lines from a ration tent with sandpaper. Another burned a spiral journal. One scout tried to dig up the first shrine. Said it was too much. Said they'd gone too far. But there was no order. No official stance. Only fracture. Some still believed. Still carved. But others began to say the spiral was a warning, not a symbol. A thing not meant to be witnessed. Only avoided. And through it all, I did not move. I let it unfold. I watched from high ridge and hollow. I did not place more journals. I did not spare or strike. I let the spiral become theirs. Let it live and turn without me. That was the real infection. Faith without contact. At the hive, the firstborn had curled itself into a tight coil near the resin pit. It hadn't shaped a shrine in days. It was watching the secondborn now, who scratched not in circles, but in lines. New marks. Straight. Intersecting. Sharp angles. A shift. A change. The spiral was not gone. But it was not enough. They had begun to look for new symbols. As if the spiral had failed. As if it could. That was the next stage. Not worship. Not fear. But replacement. They would make their own signs. Try to fix what broke. Theron had been the crack. Now came the flood. Chapter 29, The Hand Over the Spiral. The first time he did it, no one noticed. It was a small motion, subtle, practiced, easy to miss amid the shifting of weapons and the crunch of sand beneath boots. A quiet, downward press of his palm. Right hand, fingers together, arm at a slight angle. Touched just above the heart, then lowered to his waist. A handler's habit, someone might have said. A stretch. A twitch. But he did it again when they passed the third spiral. Slower that time. A breath longer. A little sharper in its edge. And the scout beside him mirrored it. Just a moment too late. That's how rituals begin. Not by law. Not by doctrine. By repetition. His name was Mason. A senior field handler. 43 years alive. 2 broken legs in his past, 3 successful Diablo's evasions, and enough trust in his rank to do things quietly, without asking. He was not loud. He was not devout. He was tired. And the spiral had been the only thing in months that made him feel like something watched back. So when Theron died crushed beneath the cracked altar, caught beneath a Baratha's weight and a mountain's failure, Mason didn't stop believing. He changed how he believed. He decided Theron had done it wrong. The guild had no answer. There were no official communications on the spirals, not anymore. Every death created more uncertainty. Every shrine generated more whispers, more internal notes, more field log inconsistencies. The spiral had become unmanageable. It was not a monster. It was not a wound. It did not fit into the codex. so they stopped writing it down, which made space for other people to do so. Mason started carving it again. Not into camp walls. Into his skin. Just below the collarbone. 7 curved lines. Done with a sharp stitch hook during a night shift, the grooves shallow, half healed by morning. He didn't show anyone. He didn't speak about it. But he touched it. Every time he passed an altar. Palm over the mark. Then down to his belt. Like a salute. And then the others started copying him. At first, just the ones who had seen the spirals themselves. Then the ones who had heard the journals read aloud. Then the ones who had seen Aro and Tella come back unharmed. They didn't believe blindly. They believed in precaution. They said the gesture wasn't faith. It was respect. They didn't say the spiral witness. They said the pattern. That was safer. Less personal. Less loaded. Just a force. An instinct. A thing to not offend. The guild began marking spiral zones as S-class intersections. It sounded scientific. Unemotional. But the field team knew what it meant. Danger. Or miracle. Depending on what you carried in your chest. I watched it all unfold. Did not interfere. I could have killed Mason. I could have torn the symbol from his chest and ended the gesture before it took root. But I didn't. Because it wasn't about belief anymore. It was about standard. And standards spread faster than stories. 3 nights after the second scout copied Mason's gesture, they added it to the morning formation. A nonverbal salute, done before deployment. Commander didn't question it. Didn't see it. But it was there. 16 hands across 16 chests. A motion born of ritual. Now routine. At the hive, the second-born had finished its new symbol. Not a spiral. A square, split once down the middle. Inside the square, 6 dots. Placed with precision. It scratched it into the resin wall facing chamber 3. Didn't hide it. Didn't ask. The firstborn saw it and hissed. Not in anger. In recognition. Then scraped the same shape into the floor of its sleeping hollow. I didn't stop them. I only watched. And I understood what came next. The spiral had become foundation. But not every structure needs to be round. The next shrine appeared near the edge of the long hollow basin. A spiral carved into sandstone, and beside it, the new square. No bones. No silk. Just the 2 symbols. One old. One new. Side by side. No explanation. No witness. The guild found it in silence. Mason was the one who recorded it. He opened his journal. Drew the spiral as he always had. Then paused. And drew the square. Same angles. Same lines. Wrote beside it. One is a wound. One is a door. Closed the book. Didn't submit the page. Kept it. That night, 10 field scouts did the gesture before bed. Not just out of habit. Out of need. The spiral hadn't saved Theron. But it had spared others. That was enough. And when the square appeared again, 10 miles west, scratched into a dead Kestodon's skull. No one erased it. Not even the disbelievers. Chapter 30, When the Hive Breaks Itself. I noticed it first in the absence. The resin wall near chamber 3 had always held the firstborn's carvings, shallow spirals, precise and steady, not artistic, not complex. Just rhythmic. Practice. Repetition. A discipline built from pattern. It returned to them often. Tended them. Scraped moss away from the grooves. Reapplied thin streaks of bone dust slurry to darken the edges. A gesture without function. A mark of ownership. I never told it to. I never praised it for it. It chose to maintain what it had made. And then one of the spirals was gone. Not worn. Not faded. Erased. Clawed through, not in one swipe, but several deliberate, targeted, scraping deep at the spiral's core where the seventh turn should have broken. The wall was scarred. Resin torn. The dust gone. The others were untouched. Only one spiral had been removed. And beside the scar, fresh lines had been carved. 4 strokes. A box. Cracked down the middle. The square. The second-born symbol. I found the second-born in the side hollow near chamber 5. It had always returned here after kills. Its den was not well formed, not symmetrical. It didn't build the way the firstborn did. It didn't care for structure or polish. It liked edges, angles, sharp corners, uncoiled nest shapes, patterns that didn't repeat. It had carved another square there. Not into the wall this time. Into the floor. Thick lines. Rougher. Shallower. But wide enough to catch light. It was resting beside it. Tail wrapped loosely around its legs. Breathing calm. Unaware, or unconcerned that I'd found it. I said nothing. I left it alone. But I watched the firstborn more closely. The firstborn didn't confront the secondborn. It never had. It had dominated quietly, through order. Through clarity. Through outcomes. It had followed me longer. It had copied faster. It had understood sooner. The spiral was its shape. The first shape it had ever made. Now something else stood beside it. And worse, now it replaced it. I confirmed the breach the next morning. Another spiral gone. This one not mine. Not placed by me. Not even carved by either spawn. A spiral drawn by a scout into the far northwest ridge wall, crude, done in chalk, smudged by wind. Overwritten. Lines crossed. A square carved over the spiral's base. The guild hadn't done that. It hadn't been erased by man. This was from within the hive. I watched the firstborn that night. It stood before its sleeping hollow. Didn't enter. Didn't rest. Just stood. Still. Breathing slow. Quiet. The secondborn passed behind it, silent, nimble. Young. Still leaner. It looked once. Didn't hiss. Didn't acknowledge. It just moved on. Returned to chamber 5. Scraped another square into the resin floor. Made no attempt to hide it. 3 hours later, I returned to chamber 5. The square was gone. The resin floor had been torn upward, peeled and gouged, the threads still curling in soft shreds. The secondborn wasn't there. At dawn, the fight happened. Not ambush. Not kill strike. Just collision. I arrived at chamber 2 in silence and found them already locked together. No hissing. No growling. Just motion. The firstborn had pinned the secondborn's chest against the side wall, claws braced around the younger's throat. Not piercing. Just holding. The secondborn clawed upward, not wild measured. It aimed for the firstborn's eyes. Missed. Connected with the resin near the jaw. No damage. They didn't roar. They didn't vocalize. They struck in silence. Not animal rage. Not sibling play. Something else. A contest of symbols. I moved between them. Only once. Stepped forward. Body tall. Tail raised. Back legs stiff. One hiss. Short. Direct. End it. They obeyed. For that moment. But the firstborn didn't return to chamber 3. It climbed upward, alone. Made a new hollow in the east tunnel. A place I had not cleared. Sharp-ridged stone. Damp. Cramped. Unfit. But it chose it. Marked the entry with 6 spirals in a row. Not evenly spaced. Stacked. Layered over each other. Heavy. Repetitive. Almost angry. The resin on its claws had grown chipped. It didn't tend them. Didn't eat for 2 nights. Didn't hunt. Just carved. Again. And again. The spiral as defiance. The spiral as resistance. The second horn moved in the opposite direction. It didn't slow. Didn't look back. It created its own spiral variant square, then spiral inside the square. Placed it on the edge of the food chamber. Not in secret. High on the wall. Visible. Then brought a live Kestodon inside. Injured. But walking. It let it rest. Didn't kill it. Didn't feed. Then released it. Marked the spot where it slept. The guild found the spiral inside a box. Square with inner arc. They hadn't seen this before. They documented it, unsure. Called it a split marker. Said it might be a new class of symbol. Unrelated. Evolutionary. I listened from the cliffs. Said nothing. And I understood what was coming. The spiral had fractured. Not in belief. Not in man. In us. In the hive. The spiral was no longer a symbol. It was now a position. A choice. A place you stood. The firstborn had claimed it fully. Singularly. Completely. It refused any mutation. It scratched over the secondborn's lines. It turned its spirals sharper. Wider. Cut deeper. It bled into the walls. And the secondborn didn't fight it. It grew away from it. That was the danger. Not death. Difference. They weren't rivals. They were founders. 2 codes. 2 origins. And the hive couldn't contain both for long. That night, I walked alone through chamber 5. Tore no symbols. Left no mark. I simply stood. Let the resin hum beneath my feet. Let the stale air settle into my joints. And I asked myself what they were becoming. Not monsters. Not tools. Not soldiers. Authors. And their language was dividing. I saw the split in how they breathed. The firstborn's chest rose in slow, even cycles. The secondborn's, faster. Adaptive. Their movement patterns diverged. Firstborn, symmetrical. Secondborn, staggered. They no longer followed at my back. They flanked. Not as equals. Not yet. But as directions. The hive had begun to fork. I could unify them. I could cull. Strike one down. Recenter the meaning of symbol. Force one shape to dominate the next. Reinforce spiral or square. Order or divergence. But the spiral had already been rewritten by both of them. And now it lived through their disagreement. Through contradiction. Like a forest that grows only after fire. Was that the hive's nature? Or was it mine? I didn't know. But I let them live. For now. In Sector 6, the guild found the first dual shrine. 2 altars side by side. 1 spiral. Perfect. Shallow. sandstone. 1 square. Deep. Sharp. Bone embedded. Each marked by an old scout fly cage. Empty. The handlers stared. Didn't speak. Then they did the gesture. Right hand over chest. Down to belt. And paused. Then one of them, female, younger, added something new. She lifted her hand again. Traced a square with her fingers in the air. Left. Right. Down. Up. Said nothing. But the others saw. And didn't stop her. Now the gesture had evolved. 2 parts. Palm, then square. Both symbols. 2 truths. Ritual had bifurcated. Like the hive. Like the belief. Like the system meant to contain them.